Discourse here on Independent Television. We're live in Benin City, Nigeria. I'm Uyi Agumofwegbe. This week on the program, we're turning attention to some of the several things that had been said at the 76th edition of the United Nations General Assembly, particularly as it touches on the address of Nigeria's President, Muhammadu Buhari, which he delivered just last Friday at the UN headquarters in New York. One of the issues he raised was the concern that many Africans, again, in particular Nigerians, have regarding the stability or otherwise of the continent. People have talked about how that the way leaders conduct themselves, the way presidents want to stick to power, some call it the sit-tight syndrome, is concerning. And the president said that no leader, no politician on the continent, ideally, should stretch their time in office beyond the tenure allowed by the Constitution. Again, the operative word is ideal, because you look at Africa today, I mean across the continent, you see people who want to stay there for decades, some for 20, 30, and even longer time, just because they feel they are the best man for the job. We've seen that happen across regions on the continent. Maybe that again has informed the idea of incessant coup on the continent of Africa. We've seen one in Mali not too long ago. The most recent of them all has happened in Guinea. Some people say when the president delivered this address in New York on Friday, it was a veiled reference to the coup. Some people say it was a bloodless coup that took place in Guinea. But what does all of this portend for the continent? Can we find peace like this? Can we find political stability? Can Africa see prosperity, economically speaking, with all of this happening? I mean, we've been referred to as the third world. These days, there's a kind of euphemism for that. They say we are the global south. But that is not a good place to be, especially when you look at global indices. I mean, you can't put Africa ultimately side by side some of the mediocre countries, so to speak, across Europe and even Asia, for example. How much of responsibility does this confer on leaders across this continent? Beginning, for example, with Nigeria, which has always, as it were, touted itself as the giants of the continent. Of course, a former CBN governor, deposed Emir of Kano, has also talked about how that it is insincerity when we refer to Nigeria as the giant of Africa. How much of truth or fact do we have in all of these remarks? We will find out on the program this afternoon. I'm joined by two brilliant gentlemen to help us create perspectives and establish, as it were, just look at the concepts behind all of these discussions this afternoon. From my immediate left, I'm joined by Solomon Idiogbe. He's a civil rights activist as well as a public affairs commentator. Solomon, thank you for coming on the program.
Good afternoon.
And next to him is an erudite scholar and an academic, no other person than Felix Osareme is also here to help us find sense in all of this. By the way, he's a lecturer at the Department of International Studies and Diplomacy at the University of Benin. Thank you, Felix, for coming.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yes, Atom. Good afternoon.
I'm going to begin with you. That's random, by the way. I want to begin with you because time and again you've been here to talk about issues around Africa in particular. But I want to look at the call that has been made by President Muhammadu Buhari. Some people probably believe no less a person should make that call. But have we been able to lead by example to push that narrative in the first place?
It will be self-serving for someone of our president's pedigree to be the one to point accusing fingers today at whether it is Mali or Guinea and explain to the listening public in the world that military coups are not acceptable. I will use that term that it will be self-seeking because he has been a beneficiary. In fact, the recognition that President Buhari enjoys today is based on the fact that he has once held power in Nigeria by extra-constitutional means in 1983 up to 1985.
But he says he's a converted Democrat now.
This is the point I'm trying to make. It is not a man that has succeeded in committing a crime and who is benefiting from the process of his crime that should come out and point fingers at others who are accused of the same crime today. If we follow the normal rule, coup d'etats are unconstitutional seizures of power. It is because when they eventually vacate office, those who have been involved are given amnesty, which most times they plan it, they negotiate it, they perfect it with whoever is going to take over from there, especially if they now transit to civilian democracies. They'll be given soft landing. That is why Buhari should be, our president is saying what he said. If we know that it's an aberration, let us help the public to understand this point. In the military, if you attempt a coup and you fail, what is the consequence? Death. It's death. In the civil society, when you attempt a coup and you fail, do they usually execute? Most times, civilian democracies do not. They will give you maybe a term in prison, believe that you will reform. That is the privilege that President Buhari is using to address the world today. And of all places, United Nations General Assembly, he should not have been the one to speak on such. He should have been the one to be looking at how his escapade and his adventure into power has distorted the historical development of Nigeria from 83 till date. Because we cannot run away from that fact that part of the things we are seeing in Nigeria democracy today is the aberration we have suffered as a country from the early escapades of the military in governance. So we have not started looking at the causes and the nature. We are looking at evaluation of its commentary. So it is not too proper. If a civilian who has been elected normally from the public to hold the highest office in the land, that of the prime minister or the president as the head of government, if such a person is the one speaking, we will understand. But if you have been a beneficiary of military adventure in power, then it is not proper. I think when we are talking about public morality, there are certain things public officers should shy away from. Because when you are now saying it, the person you are talking to in Guinea will ask you 2 questions. Did you not do the same thing before? If you are saying it's no longer fashionable now, which is what you are likely to argue, let me also do my own. Maybe I will change the narrative in my country, because when you did your own, it was fashionable. And whoever said styles go out of fashion, styles change, but style remains. So the military remains a very powerful institution in any society. That is the point that the people, the junta in Guinea, I read the commentary sometime last week that they were saying that ECOWAS does not have the moral high ground to condemn their action. After the same ECOWAS tolerates sit-tight civilian rulers. So they are giving you reasons why sometimes they come out, and they were also holding the high ground by saying that people who are condemning their action should come to Guinea and see the public support, the kind of welcome, the applause that they got from the public when they removed Condé from power. That if they were wrong, then why would they get so much acclaim? It is difficult, therefore, for certain states, because in Africa, we have about 54 countries thereabout, at least 44 have experienced military coup one time or the other.
So multiple times.
Like Nigeria, let us, because charity begins at home.
Right.
So if we are looking at that trajectory, therefore, it will not be very, very comfortable for any sitting president in Nigeria who may have been bishop of military coup to be the one to speak about the ills or otherwise of military adventure in power. That is not really very...
I'm going to go back to you in a minute, but Solomon, look at it from this perspective. People have talked about how that it is double standard, just like he mentioned in passing. That on the one hand, you're saying, no, we don't want coup. Let's not be violent about power. Let's be constitutionally minded when we deal with issues of power, how we take over power, and of course, how power evolves and so on and so forth. That's what ECOWAS would say. That's what, multilateral institution or organization like the AU would say. But the question they are asking, on the other hand, is why would these same organizations shut their eyes to sit-tight president? I mean, late Mugabe was a case in point, for instance. And you have other presidents across this country, particularly in the sub-Saharan region of the continent. Is that a failure? Is that an institutional failure on the part of the AU and ECOWAS in particular?
Definitely. Because you can't preach one thing and do another. As in the case of Maybe for want of word, I don't know what to use, but I'll just put it in the case of our president. So I don't be too derogatory. Because you can't be a judge in your own matter. Like my brother had already mentioned, he's a beneficiary of military dictatorship. And we are still experiencing military dictatorship even as he is in power. Though he's a civilian government, how many of our hues and cries has he answered? How many of our questions has he provided solutions to? So, for me, the ECOWAS heads of government are also culpable if you want to look at the issues of military junta, because you cannot actually differentiate that of the sit tights and the military dictatorship, because you were sworn in by constitution. You have a time frame, and within your time in office, you suspend the constitution in some cases. Some will redoctor the constitution to suit
by way of amendments
in the name of whatever amendments. When he said, the military said they came to the country, they would have seen how the people were jubilating and rejoicing. Every government does that. Even the least performing government in Nigeria will tell you that Ipo is I was in, with all due respect, I was in one of the South Southern states. I just came back a few days ago. I spent over a week, and I saw the difference between the activities of former governor of the state. Let me not start mentioning names so I don't become too personal. And this one, obviously sleeping. The people are not enjoying it. But if you ask him, he will tell you my people are supporting. And when you really go there with cameras, people are forced, coerced to show that they are in support of the government.
But sorry, just a second. When the coup happened in Guinea not too long ago, we saw, videos that went viral of how people were, police stunts with motorbikes and so on and so forth. Was that orchestrated?
People will always pull stunts. Go to the worst. Maybe I'm trying to be economical. As we speak today, in a state in Nigeria, for close to 1 year, they've not had commissioners. They don't have local government chairmen. They don't have councillors. There's nobody running administrative deeds of government at the local level. But try to check and ask questions. You still see people who come out and post on and say the government is doing well. You still see motorbike, you see display, you see circus. Is it circus or what you call it? People coming to tell you that the government is doing well. It's a show. Let me tell you what the African leaders have started in doing. The African leaders have started in injecting the African nation with an injection called poverty. And so for poverty, an average African man could do anything. A man who could barely feed himself 2, 3, 4 days ago, for 4 days has been hungry. Today he's been, given 100,000 naira just to come and pull that stones. And you think he won't pull it? Find out. One of the major, in fact, is a recurring decimal among the African leaders. They impoverish their people, give them less than crumbs, just to be able to put them on check and begin to do their deeds. I saw the video some time ago of the lives and times of Mobutu Sese Seko. How at a point Mobutu would take the wife of his minister, cabinet member, take her to a function and walk out the minister from the function. So much so that before the national television will bring anything on air, they must first show the picture of Mobutu Sese Seko in the cloud as if he's a god. Here in Nigeria, are TV stations and radio stations not banned in the name of one government agency monitoring and supervising the activities of broadcast stations?
But the broadcast station owners already would have signed off to the codes of broadcasters prior to establishing
you see, let me tell you, it is the animal farm syndrome. It's either you join, you queue up, or the dogs will whack you. Only about 2 weeks ago, the striking resident doctors met with the federal government. In fact, the president of NMA, Nigeria
Medical Association,
met with the president. It was a weekend, and the president insisted on them calling off their strike. And you know, normal, the president of an association cannot sit down with any head of any and just call off. He must go back and discuss
and consult.
Exactly. On a Monday, because the president has not announced a stoppage of the strike, the EFCC and the ICPC and all the watchdog of government were asked to go arresting doctors to come and explain the allowances they collected as training allowances. I saw it on a flash. I'm just telling you how they coerce people to get what they want. So in Africa, there's no difference between a man who was elected to stay in government for 4 years, 5 years, or 8 years, or 6 years, as the case may be, and is spending 30 years in office, and a man who took the power by the guns and trying to remedy the situations he met.
But two wrongs can't make it right now, can it?
But sometimes, some two wrongs could give a direction.
In the case of Africa, is that the reality?
The reality is this. Now that we are all saying, even the man who benefited from dictatorship is saying that the man who is going to benefit now should stay. Now, you see the satellite will all push there. All eyes will be on Guinea and Mali, as it were, ensuring that they bring in a democratically elected government. That is also not to say that the democratically elected government will do well. Because most often, check which of the countries where the leader got in chasing away the government. You know, most times even these military dictators will translate from military junta uniform into civilian clothing and still continue, like in the case of whom the car fits in Nigeria, as it were, and they did a 1 million march, and you know that Nigerians were suffering. We're crying and we're looking for the change. Yet, at that point, the man could show to the world that there was a 1 million march of Nigerian youths asking him to translate from military government to civilian government. Was it actually true? That's the stunt. When you ask me about people driving stunt bike, and you see all that. Because the government, they control the media, they control the powers. Today I was just reading on your scroll, on a quick one, and I was told that many military officers has been killed in Sokoto, and the military base, you know, overrun by bandits. Now, they didn't tell us the scores that were killed. They said many. But you, of course, know that it's part of the gagging. How can a government that is sincere come and say, don't talk about banditry, don't talk about kidnapping, don't talk about Boko Haram, by all TV stations as an order? Whereas that is the order of the day. It is the insecurity. So I'm just trying to let you know what happens in Africa. The African leaders have a way of holding tight to power, forcing the people to bend or they die, and then creating a scenario to the world that it is the people that said we should stay. My people love me. The EU, the ECOWAS, and all other multilateral organizations should wake up and look. I mean, look at what happened in Afghanistan. You will discover that a lot was happening. And Americans said, look, we can't continue to fight your fight for you.
We're pulling out.
We're pulling out. And you saw what happened. I fear Nigeria. You know why? Because the same road the Afghan government took, it's almost the same road we are taking. Let me tell you on a quick one. Because it may seem like I'm diverting, but I'm trying to put it in perspective that the African leaders are really not serious about their people except their pockets. Look at the American government excuses that they were not fighting their fight. With the Americans, it took us a lot of hundreds of dollars to keep an American soldier to be there.
Billions of dollars.
3 trillion.
Yeah, for you, yet you are not fighting your fight. And so they need to pull out, and they took off. What cost it? Afghanistan government created amnesty in the name of forgiving bandits and those committing
fundamentalists.
Yes, and then allow them join their army and police. And you saw how easy it was for them to take over. Today, some governors in Nigeria are clamoring for forgiveness of bandits, absorbing them into the society and allowing them, without profiling, to join freely security agencies of their choice and whatever. And you know in the end, you are giving room. They are going to know more about your security architecture. So, Africa is like a weak land. Look at today, rather than African governments, look at the issue of COVID-19 seriously. We are depending. We are third world.
You're heading obviously to the issue of homegrown solutions to the COVID problem.
Exactly.
We're going to get
before getting to even the homegrown. Don't be too dependent, because I see African as a dump yard. How can the Nigerian government be bold enough? How could they have been so bold? Came on a national television and said we're going to take an indemnity, for instance, from those manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines.
They say it's global practice.
Which global practice? The American government do same. And here we are having our governor saying you don't take vaccine, you will not go to work. Now look at it.
If you work for the government.
For the government. No, it didn't stop at that. He said you will not access any essential
public service.
So is it not the same thing? Whether you work for government, you don't work for them. Now because there are agencies providing money and funding, giving them for free, and they are collecting the largesse, and they want it to be at the detriment. And the Minister for Health could boldly say that we signed on behalf of the people of Nigeria the indemnity, and we took the indemnity from the company manufacturing the drug because they don't know the efficacy of the drug yet. And so if anything happens, Nigerian people using it, the Nigerian government will take charge. I don't get it. I don't even know if my state governor realizes that Solomon Ijugbe lives in Nigeria State.
I want to believe he does, because just a few days ago, members of the steering committee on COVID from Abuja were in Benin, including the DG of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. Maybe that's a story for another day. But for today, let's stay on course, and let me turn to Felix now. People have talked about how that Western influence is still very much palpable on the soil of Africa. They talk about powers like Britain and France. In fact, we'll see reports that claim that there are still countries, Francophone countries in particular, that still pay taxes, quote unquote, to the French authorities. Isn't that a factor in this conversation we're having, gentlemen?
Well, now we are going to history proper. We cannot run away from the fact that the scenario we are discussing this afternoon, has to do with the history of colonial rule.
Right.
Now, in most of these African states, they were nations in the context of having a common culture, common tradition. They were occupying a contiguous territory. They had a common language, and essentially what the Europeans brought was to give them a common government. Now, before the European imperialist governments interrupted the development of Africa, some African states were already imperial. We cannot run away from that. For example, we could talk of the Egyptian Empire. We could talk of the Buganda Empire. We can talk of Benin Empire or your empire. There were empires in Africa. And an empire is different from a state in the sense that by normal and modern expectation, a state has 4 major qualities apart from others: government, territory, population, and sovereignty. Then the state is defined in its territory. It also exists in perpetuity until it decides to change its order. Then it has recognition. So I'll give you 6 points. Empires are not like that. Empires expand and contract dependent on the power of the throne. Empires may be cosmopolitan to the extent that there are different nationalities. That is why if it's a nation that grew to become a state, you call it a nation state,
right,
where people of a particular ethnicity are able to now attach sovereignty and recognition and perpetuity, because they already have government and they were able to organize their administration. So without confusing anybody, please, particularly our listeners in the different parts of the world, in Africa, we had nations that were now transformed into states. in many instances, they were not in affiliation with other nations. So the concept of a state, as it is understood today, is alien to the African nationality. So African states were creations of colonial adventure, or let's start with imperial adventure that translated into colonial enterprise. Because first of all, they expanded their economic activity and began to manipulate our economy. Later, they moved in. So from imperialism, we moved to colonialism. We are in the post-colonial era today. And in the post-colonial era, there's a context that was developed by Nkrumah that mentioned neo-colonialism, which he said is even worse than colonialism, in the sense that neo-colonialism would be a situation where it would be insiders, natives, indigenous, nationals, citizens that would not be exploiting their own country for those who had colonized them previously.
That's the experience today.
I hope you are following the trajectory. So, in colonial rule, you find a white man ruling an African state. They left at independence. Nigeria is about celebrating 60 years now.
61.
61 years on 1st of October 2021, which is less than a week away. So Nigeria has been free, technically, to manage our affairs for 61 years. But how many years was Nigeria a colony? We started from 1914, and by 1960, if we take it from 1900, when the British signed the Act of Union of Lagos and the Colonial Protectorate of Southern Nigeria, which was actually done fully in 1906. Then by 1940, they merged the Colonial Protectorate of Northern Nigeria with that of the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria to create one whole. Even though there was unity in the administration, there was division in the direct administration. This was common with the British, who used divide and rule policy. In the French territories, that was even worse. They were so dominated that they were trying to wipe out local African culture in view of imposing French culture, until somebody gave them the understanding that the policy of assimilation was going to create black Frenchmen that would now create black presidents in France. So they had to quickly reverse it to now develop what they call a policy of association. In the Portuguese territories, those ones were worse off. And the Belgians, they were paternalistic. They believed the Africans were children who had no capacity to reason for themselves. So they were to sit and decide how Africans will manage their affairs, which they did until they were forced out. I'm giving you three scenarios now. Now we have the British that divided their own colonies, favored a part against another part. You will find, therefore, that in colonial adventure, different developments came out, but all of them tended towards one end. The metropolitan states, the European states that had colonies, whether British, French, Spanish, Portuguese, or Belgian, or Dutch, they had one primary objective: to benefit at the expense of the colonized. It was not a philanthropic venture. It was not a venture, as they will call it, the three C's: Christianity, commerce, and civilization. Nobody invited to come and civilize us. We were already civilized. We didn't need their commerce. We were doing well on our own. In fact, they hijacked our economic progress. Then that of Christianity. We had our own belief system. And the Christianity they have brought for us has even helped to demystify and distort our worldview worse than what we were before. So in all this, it is not just the French-speaking African countries that have this challenge. Just that of France, they are still tied closer to the Palm Springs of France, because all their foreign reserve is held by France. That is the one you would call the tax they pay. They are not really paying tax. It's France that holds their foreign reserve and balances their economic policies, their macroeconomic policies, so that their currency is dependent on...
Isn't that still, in any case, a substantial amount of influence?
It is, yes. We have not even removed the influence. Nigeria, that we have our own economic policy, we are not even... In fact, we are worse off. We are even worse off because we have done more harm to ourselves. That's why I'm giving you this... Yes, that's why I'm giving this explanation. It's neo-colonial on both sides. That of the French are even closer to their former colonial masters, the French-speaking part of West Africa. And they get largesse, but they don't have the resources we have. And we are better blessed. We are abundantly blessed, yet we have not even managed our own better. And this is why, when you are discussing the history of cool development in Africa in particular, you find that in many parts of Africa, there is suspicion from one ethnic group to another, based on the way they were developed during colonial rule. Because the nationalities were expected to fuse together to create a nation, to create a state, a nation state. It was difficult for them because the time period of colonial adventure did not allow them to mature to see themselves as one country. Rather, they see themselves, the leaders of each group see themselves as the ethnic champions. This is why ethnicity cannot be removed from politics in Africa. Then, the second part is that, in many cases, as it was common in the British territories, the people that do not have resources will be the ones that will be encouraged into the armed forces. Those that have resources will be encouraged into administration and investment and education. As soon as the British will disengage, you find that there will be this clash between those who control the power, the forces of coercion, and those who control knowledge that would have charted the way forward. And somewhere along the line, once there is a reconciliation between these two, the criminal elements in both sides, once they agree, they will hijack the state. So the state, therefore, becomes the property. And the people become the victims of the leaders. There is also another point. The political structure of the global system in geostrategic thought is that these African countries are not really poor. African countries are not poor. We are abundantly blessed with natural resources. And these resources are values that the Western world continues to appropriate. The only way they can appropriate it is to have puppets that they can manipulate. And to do that, at times, you therefore find governments and security agencies in the developed world sponsoring coups, even against African leaders who actually have good intentions to move their country from where they are to where they need to be. And this is why, particularly in the period of the Cold War, you find that if you switch to the capitalist camp, the communists will come and help topple your government. If you switch to the communist camp, the capitalists will topple your government, because each of them wanted to make sure that they have enough on their side in the camps. They move beyond the issue of geostrategy. Now, come back to Africa itself. We have African leaders who are bereft of knowledge. They will borrow policies and ideologies from the Western world. They will tell you that Marxism said you must provide everything for everybody. Even Karl Marx was very poor. Karl Marx could not even bury one of his children that died because he was poor. Karl Marx lived on welfare from his associate Friedrich Engels, who was supporting. That's why Karl Marx had enough time to sit down and be writing, because somebody was not taking care of him and his family. He ran into poverty. He experienced poverty firsthand. And his policies will not work in the world of today. Let us not drag this argument beyond what is reasonable. So the Marxist argument, therefore, cannot work in an agricultural economy the way we are not industrial yet. Meanwhile, the Marxist mentality and philosophy was brought for us by an industrial environment. Karl Marx was actually talking more about the industrialization of society, and that the workers were now wage earners. And we bring that one to Africa, where people are mostly dependent on land.
Agro.
We are agriculture, we're agro-allied. And that is why, once we now have resources and natural minerals that we cannot manage well, you always find foreign companies coming to help us exploit these resources,
which again to a large extent has brewed some of the conflicts. Yes. I want us to talk about what somebody earlier today off television, quote unquote, called sea finish by European countries in particular. We're going to talk about that just after this break, so the gentleman with me in the studio can push the conversation one step further. Stay with me. Thank you for staying with us, everyone. So, let me talk to you about the issue of how Africa interacts with the West, the global West, that is, especially Europe, for example. Our own Chimamanda Adichie, who has, of course, put Nigeria and Africa indeed on the map, or the global map, recently has been speaking in Berlin, Germany. She's been talking about home, as it were, issues. She's been talking about how that artifacts had been taken away from Africa, and of course Nigeria, and in particular from Benin. She's talked about how that the continent had been plundered by these so-called colonial masters, whether it's Britain, whether it's Portugal, whether it's France, and so on and so forth. And she talks about how that Germany on the one is saying, look, we are returning 1,000 artifacts that we had taken from Africa. This is one way we're trying to cement our relationship. We're trying to make some level of restitution, and so on and so forth. But then again, there are conditions. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, African leaders are saying, including Nigeria, for example, can we not have unconditional return of all the artifacts that you took, some people say stole, from our continent? Meanwhile, some scholars are now saying that you have an act in England that forbids you from returning any artifact, one piece of artifact from the London Museum, for example, we're told that there's a similar act somewhere in France that also forbids the French authorities, unless, of course, where you have a peculiar situation and there has to be an express approval by the authorities, and so on and so forth. How disadvantaged in Africa in this conversation?
Totally disadvantaged. Unfortunately, there's the same people our African governments are running to for help. So he who pays the piper, of course, obviously, he takes the tune. I saw the clip where the authorities in UK was talking about they have no intention of returning the artifacts. They feel it is safer and better.
Because they can't trust our capability to...
They feel it is safer and better
to keep those items.
To keep it there, so that the world can see it. And the man questioning him said, of course, the African people can also say they want to also have a museum where you can... He said, no, they don't have the intention of bringing it. They are intending to keep it and do whatever it is for the African, especially Nigerian government to understand that it's safe and it's better there. That is it. Let me take you home. Here we were talking about returning artifacts. Discussing it. Whereas the British government was not even considering returning it. They were looking for a loophole. And there came a clash between the state government and the palace from where the things were stolen. Whereas this fight was ongoing, the federal government came with a third leg and said, no, in fact, the talk for now is a talk, so you never reach on our hand. Now we get them. It's like a case of a man or two men walking along the street and thought of seeing $1 million on the ground.
Imaginary 1 million.
Just an imaginary 1 million. And the other one said, well, if we see it, I'll take 70%. You take 30%. And said, no, why? Why would I take 70? You take 70 and I take 30. And it resulted into fighting. And they had a bloody fight over an imaginary 1 million naira. So, Nigerian government, the Nigerian people, the African nation have been so disadvantaged, carried away by the paparazzi they see in the European world, without actually sitting down to looking at the issues as they were. We're carried away by mere comments made. We are not looking at the derogatory comments made against African nations. We are called third world. It's derogatory. So for years, my very senior guy had asked the question, for how long has Nigeria been independent? 61 years. For how long was Nigeria colonized? Check. From 1900 to 1914, it's, and then to 1960. To 1960.
60 years.
We're just talking about 60 years from 1900. But if you look at it from 1914, we're looking at about 47 years in actual colonization, because between 1900 and 1914, it was a preparatory ground of amalgamations of both the South and the North.
And pacification of the different
areas.
Ethnic communities.
Communities. Now, look at within the 47 years, you got oil drills, you understand, you got development in those areas. And for another 60 years, you have been 61 years now, by October 1st, what development have the African governments given to the African people that they are governing? That's where his comment comes, where Nkrumah talked about the ideology of the neo-colonialism. It's not totally different from the slave trade, because the slave trade era was also a neo-colonial experience. You selling your own to the European nation or to the Western world, and then using you as a slave. And I remember a comment made by I'm trying to remember Dotun or something, who talked about conspiracy. That the government in Africa is a conspiracy. And what context was he trying to paint? That the wise, the strong, the intelligent ones in Africa were sold out in slavery, in neo-colonialism, to the Western world, Those who were left were sons and daughters of those who connived to sell the sons and daughters of the brave. You understand? Before the Europeans, whether the Portuguese or whatever, got our people for slave buying. You must be strong, you must have that muscle, you must be energetic, you must have something to give. They didn't just pick weaklings. Those who they could not sell to slavery were those weaklings who ran. Or the one who said this one no go fit work, we not fit sell this one. They go, you know, go sell for market, they go price them low. They kept those ones. Or those who were smart enough to have room to hide. Or those who were descendants, like sons and daughters of those who were doing the trade. And so who give them? A tortoise will only give birth to a tortoise. So what we're having in Africa today are the sons and daughters of those who sold our nation to the whites. And so they're still selling us as governments of the African nation.
Again, that raises the question of how seriously the international community takes Africa,
so that
especially when we go to global events
so
like the United Nations General.
From the question you ask, what is our benefit?
Right.
We're at a loss. Altogether, because we are still being sold daily. If your father was a king that sold the sons of Jacob and Jeremiah to slavery as African leader, and his sons and daughters have grown up today and they are still in government, because check, since 1999 we had the set of democracy we have now. It's still the same set of people. The only man who mistakenly entered into the ranks was Goodluck Jonathan.
Wasn't it a mistake?
Or mistakenly.
I mean, he has had this.
With all due respect.
He has had this trajectory of being in power.
No, it was just a second fiddle, with all due respect, and he just got it, you know, by chance. It's still the sons and daughters. How would, you know, somebody from an extraction get what they refer to as waiver, duty waiver, and some other persons doing similar business from another extraction will pay heavily for what somebody from the other extractions got a waiver for? It's still the same neo-colonialism. So African is losing by the day. How can you imagine a farmer who goes to the farm for 1 year, harvests a product, sells it back to the imperialist or to the right if you like, and then they bring back the same product, byproduct of your original product in 3 or 4 different, and you buy it higher. For instance, they are selling a tuber of yam for 1 naira, and they come with that same tuber of yam processed as either pando yam, as the scale, as amala if you like, and all the byproducts that comes from it, and they are selling each for you now, each of the byproduct for 1 naira, and you sold the entire yam.
Having processed it. And you have the ability to do the same processing, rather than the African nations and African leaders inviting these imperialists to invest or teach. Because what I know, when you bring expatriates, they are supposed to train your people on what and how it is done, and then your people will learn, and then you improve. Over time, the African leaders have succeeded in not training anybody, but investing out. When they steal their money, put in Swiss account or go. Nigerian doctors are on strike, my brother. Are they not? Who suffers? The Nigerian people, Abi. When our leader is sick, he flies to the UK. Nigerian schools are shut down. Lecturers are not happy over the welfare of government. And the sons and daughters of the elite are either in the UK school in the US, or in the Caribbean, if you like. How will they fix the dwindling economy? When you carry your resources up there, because you pay school fees, you give them all the necessary things that they need, and they are developing there. So, the problem of African states today is created by the African nation and the African leaders who do not see beyond their nose, who are only interested in talking stories and making narratives and not finding solutions. Your African civilian leaders, some are in government for 30 years, 20 years, you are not sanctioning them. A man who was involved in a coup before he came,
isn't it? He got removed by another coup d'etat. And since then, he's been enjoying the largesse. Because while Obasanjo became president, he was appointed as PTF...
under Abacha.
Abacha,
yes. PTF chairman.
PTF chairman, under Abacha. The same dictatorship. When Obasanjo came, he also appointed him as head of something too. But the point I'm making is that the recognition you got is as a result of the fact that you were once a dictator, you were once head of government. The recognition.
But really, I mean, in fairness, can you really do much to your past? I mean, it has happened.
No, you should not be the one castigating somebody
on moral grounds, you mean?
Both on moral and on social grounds.
You see, just a minute. Ethically, you legitimize criminality that way. That's the bottom line. That is why today you now find that hard-working Nigerians are scorned. It has now become a materialist society where, so long as you have money to show, whatever you do to get the money doesn't matter.
Let me take you to
a minute. Yes.
A few weeks ago, I watched on YouTube an interview, I think from CNN, when they were asking him how he saw the doctors living.
Okay, in droves.
Yes. And he said, it's beneficial that they go there and learn, they open the hospital, and it was not brain drain anything. That he knows a lot. I have the video. That he has a lot of doctor friends who went to Europe, they are doing big, they have their private hospitals now, they came back because of what they saw there. And your doctors are on strike. And you saw them queue up, going to enroll. In fact, I saw one who said she saw her lecturer. When she saw her lecturer,
who was a consultant.
Yes, here, seeking for the same job, she knew that it was finished. Yet a minister, because when the minister speaks, it's assumed that the federal government has spoken. That's how bad.
Let's wrap it up.
That's how bad it has become. And it is not Nigeria. I'm stating Nigeria as an example. It's all over the African continent.
Wide, okay.
That the people we obviously sometimes select in error, thinking we elected them as leaders, are the problems of the African states.
Great. Okay, we're just going to wrap up now, gentlemen. Let's do that with Felix in 2 minutes. People have talked about, I mean, he just mentioned in passing now the issue of brain drain. People have talked about how that professionals leave this country from across critical sectors almost by the minute. I mean, before, during, and even now that we are beginning to fight the COVID-19 to a larger extent. Talk about brain drain, talk about all other, what some persons will call manipulative, if you like, strategies that the West uses in exploiting Africa. But then again, they say that it is because Africa as a continent has left that door wide open for them. Sometime in 2011, there was a report released that claimed that there were more Ethiopian doctors in California than you had in Ethiopia. How true that is left to be seen. But the point that was being made in that article is the fact that professionals, people with capacity, leave Africa almost by the minute. And then people have talked about how that even scholarships given by schools in the western part of the world, including Ivy League colleges in the US, for example, are all ways of, as it were, continuing to, it's an attrition, that's what they say, that's an attrition. They talk about things like, say, the Chevening Scholarship, for example. So far this year, we've seen at least 50 Nigerians who have been selected for the Chevening Scholarship. People say that it's a way of weakening the African continent economically, politically, academically, professionally, in all areas, just to ensure that in the end, the West continues to hold that competitive advantage. Is there light at the end of the tunnel as we wrap it up now?
The end of the tunnel is still very dark. If there is light, it is candle light, and it can be blown out by the wind. A gust of wind will blow out our candle. Well, we cannot run away from the fact that we still have a semblance of society, organized as it is, but with a lot of distortions. And I do not actually pander to the school of thought that the West should be blamed for most of the things that are happening to us. I disagree essentially on account of the fact that we have been exposed enough. We are now undoing ourselves. There was this book by Walter Rodney then, when we enter university, that's the first book they give us in
How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Stanley Igwe, a Nigerian author, wrote a second version, How Africans Underdeveloped Africa. I have the second version, if I have the two. So whenever I'm looking at Europeans, I'll ask myself, what did we contribute to this challenge? Yes, this is a conditioning process. If you talk of the economic condition of Latin America, it's a school of thought. That was one of the principal architects was Teodono dos Santos, who developed the concept of dependency. And dependency, he says, is a conditioning situation where you will begin to respond to dictates from a metropolitan state. You will think you are free, but you are not really free. Somebody is manipulating you, or make sure that whatever you do is a reflection of what they have planned. But they will give you some latitude. It's just like a rat that is in a maze. You put the ice cube and you put the cheese, the rats keep moving. Africa will not break even under the geostrategic structure of world economic domination as it is currently managed by Western Europe. Now, not only Western Europe, because we always point at Western Europe. China is even doing the same. China is coming. China is already knocking. China has started cutting our own pound of cake, our own pound of flesh. She's cutting already into Africa. And Africa is always the place. Why? Answer this question for yourself very easily. Africa has abundant natural resources. So these industries in the Western world and in China thrive because the raw materials they need are from Africa. So Africa is a poor continent that is very rich in natural resources, but people are being impoverished by a combination of the leaders who do not know how to lead very well and their collaborators. So the international economic system is such that the African commoner is the one that suffers. The African commoner today suffers double exploitation, exploited by his own people, his own leaders who are supposed to protect him and who exploit him on behalf of their international masters, what we call the center of the periphery and the periphery of the periphery. So we, in the mass of African societies, are the periphery. They are the extreme. But the leaders in Africa are the center of the periphery. In the Western world, you have the center of the center. And the people in the Western world are also the periphery of the center. In all of this, the African is being exploited by the entire chain. And the African will not progress. We should not be looking... Look, that is why religion is thriving so well. Religious business is thriving well in Africa because it's an escape from reality. You say, don't worry, your reward shall be getting. Don't worry, pray, miracle will come your way. Don't worry. Because even when you work hard, you don't see value for your hard work because somebody is waiting for you to work and take back what you have worked. That is why those doctors who are moving, it is not just brain drain alone. Attrition is also part of it. But they cannot but do otherwise. If they come back here, even if they want to put in their best,
they will not get commensurate value.
The conditions here created by our leaders who do not want to de-link. Because if our leaders are now ready, you see, there's always this bottom line. The great fear is, if I do this, I will be eliminated. But we will all die one day. As former Senator Dillon used to say, if you talk, you die. If you don't talk, you die. Why don't we call them bluff?
I'm sure this is where we're going to leave it. This is a conversation that's been very interesting and incisive. Thank you so much, Solomon Diogbe, for coming. And Felix Osarime, thank you as well.
Thank you, Yi, for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.